Hi everybody, Karen Alari here. In today's small talk, I'd like to talk about telling your story when you paint. So, when we first start learning to paint, our focus is all on just getting things to look like things and being able to make that tree look the way we want it to and get a sense of realism and three-dimensionality. And then after a while, when you get those tools under your belt, then it's time to think a little bit about why you're painting. What's the story you're trying to tell? And what are some of the things that you can do to get to that story? So today I'm just going to run through a few of my paintings and show you the comparison of what I started with and what I was trying to say and what I did to get there. And let's see how that works. So the first one is the Gingko Tree. And in this one, I didn't have to make a lot of changes. I was walking down the street one day and saw this reference photo, or saw this house along the road, and I just loved the color, the blue of the house and the gold of the tree. So really, the whole story was just about this picturesque house and the color harmony, or the color um, beauty that I saw in the colors singing together like that. So when I decided to translate it, this is a pretty small, this was a 10 by 10 inch painting, I believe. So in translating it, you can see I pretty much just painted what was there. There are a few things that I edited out because they didn't tell the story. And so that's a really key part of it, is you want to look for anything that doesn't add to your story, then edit that out. You don't need it. So this little house over here, the barn really, or shed, didn't tell my story. It didn't say anything to me. And I also wanted to give a little more lead in, a little more sidewalk area, so that I could do these fallen leaves, have more visual of the fallen leaves on the ground. And I went back and forth about putting in this interesting old rocking chair that's tattered, and it's right in the middle of the pet porch there. I decided that it didn't tell my story because this wasn't a story about old things necessarily. It was a story about color. So I left that one out, and instead I added color here in this area to pump up the color there, and put this part of the barn completely in shadow. So, I didn't change a lot. The color is a little brighter in the trees just because I like those brighter colors. I also put some green behind here that isn't there because I just didn't want this uh, line here, this sort of arrow pointing off of the canvas, to be real obvious. So by putting something that was of a similar value back there, it just becomes less obvious to the eye. So that was that little story I was telling about this yellow tree and the blue house. And a story doesn't have to be complicated, but it needs to come from your heart, something that touched you. And that's what touched me in that little painting. So here's another one. This one's called Bird Watching. Again, this was, I think, a 10 by 10 painting. And this is from photos that I took of these little birds on my back fence. So my story with these little birds is just that I watch them every day out my back window, and they're sort of in community. They're always sitting next to each other and flying together and eating together, and there's always this real sense of community. So I like that. And then I just like the red and green complementary colors going on with the holly bush behind it. So really that was the whole story, was these sort of neutral colored birds against the red and green complementary colors, and they're having a little conversation. That's my story. So you can see I used a couple of different reference photos to do that. Here's this little guy here. This little guy, I took his sort of his stance, but I reversed it so that it was facing more inward. It gave me more of an inward feeling there. And then this little guy was looking down at something on the ground, and instead I put him up here in the holly bush, so I get this sort of little conversation going on between the three of them. And Anyway, so that's kind of the story of this one. Some of the things that I did change, the color of the fence, it was brightly lit on the front, and I didn't want a lot of attention to the fence. I wanted it just to be cool and neutral in the background, so you can see I kind of changed that up. But I didn't change a whole lot of else in this. I was just trying to create this conversation and create with the holly leaves themselves have this sort of arrows pointing us inward and this one bringing us back around and up. So I tried to create a little motion with those holly leaves. Here's another one. This is a bridge in my town here in Portland. And here's where this image started. It was another one that I took out on one of my walks one day. And I really liked the image, so I decided to play with it a little bit, which is another thing that I do. A lot of times, if I just can't quite get the image to just lock in and tell my story, then I'll put it into Photoshop and play around with it a little bit. The story here is just about crows are very prevalent in my town, and then here's our little bridge, and then the colors of the fall tree as a nice little counter complementary color going on between the bridge. So you can see that I raised or I enlarged the crow in Photoshop just to give him more presence, you know, make him a real focal point in the image. And then I also, this tree is kind of cut off a little bit strangely here. Looks like they topped it or something. And instead I just wanted a sense of just kind of framing with the foliage going on. So I used the clone tool in Photoshop and just created some more of the tree up here and then took out this awkward trunk or limb or branch or whatever it is coming up there. So of course I resized it to the size I wanted, so that I ended up with this little painting, and this one was a 8 by 10, I believe. So these are all small paintings, and they were ones that I was doing fairly loosely and quickly, so I wanted that to be part of the story too, was the brush strokes. And I wanted those to be visible and so that you could see them. So of course I took out all the extra wires, but I did need at least one wire for Mr. Crow to be sitting on there. So that's pretty straightforward, but you know, that's another way to help you tell your story is you can either do it in sketches, little 2 by 3 inch pencil sketches to try out different compositions until that seems to lock in and say, oh, that's what I saw. Because a lot of times, you know, people want to paint exactly what they're seeing out there, but for me, I want to paint what that image, what that view made me feel, what my response was to it. So for me, the crow was very prevalent in the image, and of course the bridge and the colors of the tree. So I just created a pleasant composition around those elements that spoke to me in that, because that's my story. So let's see, here's another one. This one's called In the Vineyard. And again, this is actually a very small painting. I do believe, well, it doesn't matter how small it is. I think it might be a 5 by 5 though, just a little tiny one. And this isn't a photograph I took in a vineyard down in California. And I do love this image, and I love all that's going on back here. But the story that I was telling in this little painting was just about the lushness of the grapevines. And so also, you know, you have to keep in mind how big of a canvas are you using. So if you're using a tiny little canvas, you're not going to be able to put all this kind of detail in there. It'll just start getting really busy. So instead, I just wanted to keep it to the simple 3 elements of the tree, and then the vineyard, the vines, and then this little this little flowery area. And, you know, walking around the vineyard that day, there were lots of these little wildflowers growing. And of course, when I'm walking around and I'm focused on the wildflowers, so I see them. And in my mind and in my experience, they become much bigger than maybe they are in real life, if that makes any sense. So what I really took away, the story I took away from that vineyard was the lush green of those vines. And I love the way they grow up like this, and they're popping up, and these little, I wanted to get that sense of these little random leaves up against the sky like that. And so I added a few grapes left on the vine, even though that day I think there weren't very many left on the vine, or if they are, they're just so dark I can't see them in the picture. So that was my story. The lush vines, the wild flowers, the beautiful sunny day. And this, you know, a lot of times with a vineyard painting, you end up with these kind of lines that lead you off of the painting, which you don't necessarily like compositionally. You don't want the eye to just continue right off and leave your painting. So this tree in the background really created a nice stop, a stop for the eye, that then your eye follows down and then comes back around into the tree, and then sees these leaves and follows uh, back down along the vines, and then back down here again to the wildflowers. Of course, the purple of the wildflowers also helps integrate the colors between the ground and the vineyard. I kept the values really close back here also, so that this kind of blends together. You can see these are bluer. You don't see that here in the vines. You don't see a drastic change of color really. They're a little bit more blurry back here, but I pushed that color change to give more of a sense of distance and perspective going back. And then I just completely simplified these background mountains into one, you know, bluish mountain in the distance. Let's see if I can get through any more of these. This one I took quite a bit of liberties. It was a spring day, and it was fresh and bright, and walking around I just had this feeling of spring, and it's so nice after the winters here that are so dark and dreary sometimes. It just is really exciting to be in the spring. Again, this was a very small painting, so I wanted to simplify things. I wanted to get the bridge in there. I started this one by the whole canvas was this kind of peachy color that I started with, and you can see that peachy color peeking out here and there throughout the painting, which is a great way to kind of integrate your painting as well. Leave that background block in color peeking through in areas. So I chose very springy colors, very bright, fresh. I added, whereas there were some wildflowers here, I added even more, and I chose them to integrate the painting. So I chose peaches to be like the sky, and the purples that are like the sky in the background, and added some of the blue-greens to the of the bridge into here, into the foliage. You see those same colors, and just by adding those in, just putting those colors throughout the painting, it integrates the colors in the painting and makes it kind of go together in a harmony. So I think that that's pretty much all we're going to get through here in this little small talk. So, but I just wanted you to give you that inspiration. Don't feel like you have to have the perfect photo or the perfect view, but instead think about how you're responding to the view. I was trying to bring out my sense of spring, my feeling of spring, my story of spring in the painting, and ask yourself, what can I do to bring that out? What can I do to tell my story with these paint colors and with the composition and with simplifying and editing? So I hope you think about those a little bit, and I hope it inspires you to get out and bring your own story to your painting. And I'll talk to you in the next small talk. Take care.